Hello everyone, welcome in the 6th episode of the 2nd season of Searching for the Slavic Soul. I am really excited about today's episode because today we will be finally getting out of the home and family milieu and we will start doing what our pre-Christian pagan ancestors did best, which is to go out there in the world and see what Istina has to offer. I am not going to lie to you. The ability of pagan Slavs to spread across much of Europe and into Asia while preserving the ethno-linguistic and cultural cohesion is something that I have always found absolutely mind-blowing. Just recently I was reading a textbook of Slavic philology, and there was a picture of one page of Frisby manuscripts with transliteration, obviously, because the handwriting of early medieval monks is only marginally easier to read than my own handwriting. So just to make it clear here, for the reading purposes, I looked at the transliterations, not at the picture of the manuscript itself. Because despite all my interest in early medieval history, paleography is not something in which I have much interest, let alone skills. But never mind, I was talking about Frisby manuscripts, where there is written in Latin alphabet the oldest surviving text in the Slavic language. The text was written down in the 8th century, but the Frisby manuscripts are dated from the 10th century. This is a copy of the original text. So the text is written in a Slavic dialect of Carinthia or Pannonia, in an alphabet that did not have enough letters to write down all the Slavic vowels and consonants. Because, just in case you are not aware, early Slavic dialects had 1 more vowel phonemes and 4 more consonant phonemes compared to Latin, which obviously was a huge problem when one wanted to write down any Slavic language in Latin alphabet. By the way, if you are curious, modern Polish has 3 less vowel phonemes than the early Slavic language, but has 6 more consonant phonemes, a total of 31, which is why Polish is so difficult to pronounce. Still, Polish is not the most consonant-rich of Slavic languages. The record goes to Belarusian, which has a whopping of 39 consonant phonemes, which is absolutely crazy. But I am not talking linguistic today. I am talking about how mind-blowing cultural... actually I was talking about the Frisby manuscripts. Give me a moment. About the Frisby manuscripts? Give me a moment. Let me just retrace my steps. 18th century Slavic dialect, copied to the 10th century manuscript. Yes, this is what I'm talking about. So, the person who was attempting to write down the Slavic dialect did not have enough letters in Latin alphabet to write down all the sounds of the Slavic dialect. On top of it, the person who wrote down the Slavic phrases, as it is strongly suspected, wasn't a native Slavic speaker, but was a native speaker of Old High German. And despite all of that, in the year of 2025, nearly 1300 years after the Slavic dialect was written down, I can still understand most of it, although not all of it. What more, my daughter, despite knowing only Polish, also could understand some of it. My friend, who's Russian, and whom I showed the transliteration of the Frisby manuscripts, also could understand a lot of it. However, what was interesting, she found the transliteration by a Russian linguist, Alexander Isachenko, easier, while for me and my daughter it was easier to understand the transliteration by Slovene linguist Fran Ramovos and Milko Kos. But still, each one of us was able to understand some of the 8th century Slavic dialect, which just comes to show how astonishing is the cohesion and strength of the Slavic language and how unbreakable are our bonds with our Slavic ancestors through language and through culture. And this is why I taught my daughter Polish, to give her the gift of a connection with the generations of Slav going back in this example 13 centuries, but really so much further than that. So this is what pre-Christian pagan Slavs had. They had the culture and the language that allowed them to codify coherence and a reliable, replicable way of exploring the world, making it theirs, and building a lasting heritage for the next generations. And this is why I am besotted with Slavic paganism. I want to have what my ancestors had, the ability to thrive when facing new and unexplored, while remaining, even if only through language or spiritually, connected to the very heart and soul of the place that the first Slavs called home. And now, in a culture that has no written language, such as the pre-Christian Slavic culture, the vehicle of the cultural memory, the very thing that codifies and replicates the cultural coherence, are the stories the culture tells. And this is not a statement I just made up and pull out of the ceiling. That is a well-recognized fact of cultural anthropology. And this is why today we will be talking about the stories the postmodern Western culture tells you, the stories you believe to be true, and how these stories relate to the stories our pagan ancestors were telling each other. I must start with the caveat that the original postmodern theory, as articulated in, say, the postmodern condition by Lyotard, it rejects all narratives, all stories, and it claims that it's all made up and none of it is true. However, building on that, the postmodern, let's call them writers, since they can't possibly be called thinkers, as all the stuff they created and written down is just one big stupid, thoughtless nonsense. But these not thinking creators of postmodern doctrine, they did create a lot of stories, such as the story of bad colonialism and how evil it is for one culture to impose on another culture, and how it is a duty of any good leftist to rescue the poor, oppressed minorities that are being exploited by the West. So, believe it or not, in the year of 1863, a group of Polish leftists and progressives who were students and young intellectuals, who were rich, and some of them were even aristocratic, they also came to conclusion that they must rescue the poor, oppressed minorities that were being exploited by, in this case, the East. For them, the oppressed minorities were Ukrainian Serbs, and the rescue they wanted to provide to them was freedom, equality of rights, and free land that the Serbs were supposed to get from the Russian Empire. The difference between the Polish progressive left in the 19th century and the modern progressive left was that the Polish progressives wanted the Ukrainian Serbs to ally with Polish insurrection against the Russian Empire, while the modern Western progressives just want to feel good about themselves because they are brainwashed and have nothing else in life to feel good about. But other than that, it's the same story. The Western progressives are coming to rescue the poor Serbs oppressed by the empire. And do you know what the Ukrainian Serbs did with the Polish progressives? They killed them. To be precise, they lynched them. On the 9th of May of 1863, 21 Polish progressives arrived in the village of Sołowijówka and started to explain to the Ukrainian serfs that these Ukrainian serfs are hereby free and equal in rights, and they will even get free land if they only stand up to the oppressive Russian Empire. The Polish progressive even showed the Ukrainian serfs a golden wreath, which was called Złota Hramota. And in this wreath, there was written in golden letters that everything that as you would call them now, white saviors, that everything these white saviors were saying was true. And really calling the 19th century Polish leftists the white saviors is not entirely inaccurate, because the skin of the Ukrainian serfs was like the skin of any farmers, likely weathered by sun and wind, while the skin of the progressive Polish urbanites was likely as white as skin of any highly educated member of the white elites back then and nowadays. And now, of course, neither the Polish progressive leftists nor the Ukrainian serfs were officially pagan, but the Ukrainian Serbs, like any Slavic Serbs, were only superficially Christianized and preserved a lot of pagan traditions, including the pagan approach to a bunch of foreigners with golden wreaths and promises pulled out of a hat. So, my lovelies, stop trying to save the world. Firstly, the world does not need to be saved. The Ukrainian Serbs, as all of the people who you called oppressed, might not live the life you want them to live, but it is their life, and they do not need some overeducated morons to tell them what to do with it. What more, they know something that you, in the depth of your delusion, refuse to see. No one, nowhere, and for no reason wants to help anyone out of the goodness of their heart and with no selfish motives. For the Polish leftists in the 19th century, the motives were to agitate against Russian Empire. For you, the modern leftist of the West, the motive is virtue signaling, so you can score points in the internal fight of the elites, which is beautifully explained by Musa al-Gharbi, a leftist and a progressive who wrote a book titled We Have Never Been Woke, in which he explained, step by step, how elites use all the woke bullshit slogans to ensure own advancement within the elites. By the way, the Ukrainian Serbs did see through the lies of Polish leftists, but they failed to see through the lies of the Russian leftists when the Bolsheviks offered them the same deal that the Polish leftists wanted to persuade them to take. And you know what was the result of this bad judgment of Ukrainian Serbs? Hołodomor, a massive famine in Ukraine induced by Stalin on purpose. No one knows exactly how many people died in Hołodomor, but it was millions. The West knew about it, and it not only remained silent, but it willingly covered it up. There was even an article about it published in the New York Times. The article was titled, "Russians Hungry but Not Starving." Of course, they were not Russians, but Ukrainians, and they were not hungry, but literally starving, because Stalin ordered all the food in the Ukraine to be taken away. I will link up to a short video about Hołodomor in the notes of this episode in case you want to know more. But as to why you should stop trying to save the world, the second reason is that if you want to follow the Slavic Pagan way, you leave alone the world and take care of your family. And once your family is taken care of, you might consider taking care or just helping out your neighbors. No pagan Slav ever was even remotely interested in helping or freeing or rescuing anyone outside of his or her own family, or at the most, tribe. And if you don't believe me, let me refer you to the speech of Dobręta, the leader of Slavic tribes in Dacia, who in the second half of the 6th century told the emissaries of Pagan Bayan, the ruler of Pannonian Avars. And Dobręta said, "No one has yet been born or appeared under the sun who could tame our power. We are accustomed to ruling over other people's land, not to having other rule over ours. And we are certain of this as long as war and swords exist." After hearing that, the Kagan's emissaries expressed, apparently in no uncertain terms, doubts in the might of Slavic warriors, so Slavic warriors just slaughtered them. And since we are on the topic of the Slavs and the Pannonian Avars, I really should mention that Pagan Bayan actually did manage to conquer the few Slavic tribes in Pannonia. And you know what the Slavic tribes from Dacia did about it? Absolutely nothing. And you know why? Because no pagan Slav ever was even remotely interested in helping or freeing or rescuing anyone outside of his or her own family, or at the very most, tribe. And the Slavs in Pannonia were different tribes than the Slav in Dacia, hence there was no helping, no freeing, and no rescuing. Do remember that next time when you'll be considering standing up for some random people somewhere on the other side of the world. Indiscriminately caring for random strangers is a Christian thing to do. It is not, and never has been, a Slavic pagan thing. And for the record, the same applies to all these pan-Slavic dimwits who call for all the Slavs to unite and to be like brothers, or some other Marxist bullshit. I have spoken about it at length in the 5th episode of the 1st season, to which I will link up in the comments. And here only I am going to note that Slavs were never, will never be united, because that's the nature of the Slavs in general and pagan Slavs in particular. So, another story you sunshines are telling yourself, particularly if you are in the North America, is that you are some sort of illegitimate inhabitants of the land on which you live. And for this reason, you owe some apologies or acknowledgement or even reparation to the people who, as you claim, you invaded. And now, firstly, you have not invaded anyone. I bet you wouldn't even know where to start invading anyone or anything, including your own room. Your ancestors knew how to invade places, which is the reason why you are alive. But you got yourself brainwashed, rejected the heritage of your bloodline, and turned into delusional snowflakes who think that good life comes to those who give up and not to those who fight for it. And secondly, as you have heard from the Slavic leader Dobręta, invading is what pagan Slavs do. How do you think early medieval Slavs managed to get from the cradle of the Slavs, somewhere between Vistula and Dnieper rivers, to the Elbe and Saale rivers on the west, to Baltic Sea and the Gulf of Finland to the north, to Ural Mountains on the east and Balkan Peninsula and the Black Sea on the south? How do you think such expansion happens? Peacefully? If you think such expansion could be peaceful, there is something seriously wrong with you, and you really need to address your delusion. Pagan Slavs were warriors as much as they were farmers. They were invaders as much as they were protectors of their family and their land. The only apologies Slavic pagans gave were apologies to their own people for failing them. They never paid any reparations to anyone. If they paid money, it was a tribute to the warriors who conquered them. If they conquered some other people, they were taking the wealth of the people they conquered. Because pagan Slavs knew something that was obvious to the whole world only like 5 minutes ago. They knew that if something is worth having, you need to protect it, otherwise someone else comes and will take it from you. And if you cannot protect what you have, you do not deserve to have it. I spoke about it at length in the 21st episode of the first season of Searching for the Slavic Soul, so go and listen if you want to know more. But, contrary to the story of your ancestors, not only your pagan and Slavic ancestors, but literally all of your ancestors, you reject the story of protecting that which is worth having. The story you tell yourself is a completely different one. You tell a story of poor, innocent, and peaceful indigenous people who were brutally conquered by your ancestors, and hence you owe the descendants of these poor, innocent, and peaceful indigenous people some reparations. So let's just break it down, shall we? No indigenous people ever were peaceful or innocent. Before the mid-20th century, not a single group of peaceful and innocent people ever made it past the second generation. Because humans are not peaceful and innocent species. The Aztecs, the indigenous people of the lands that's currently called Mexico, they were so brutal and oppressive that ruled by them tribes willingly allied with Hernán Cortés to get rid of the oppressive rule of the Aztecs. In the 17th century, in the Great Lakes region, due to intertribal competition for control of trade routes and hunting territories, several tribes were either nearly or completely wiped off the face of the planet by the innocent and peaceful indigenous people. What's worth mentioning, these innocent and peaceful indigenous people, they allied with the French, English, and Dutch to help them decimate other tribes of innocent and peaceful indigenous people. So, humans are not peaceful and innocent species. Actually, nothing in nature is peaceful and innocent. If you don't believe me, compare the lifespan and mortality of animals in the wild and animals in captivity. Before the West got so rich that it was able to ensure lasting peace in Europe or North America, no living being could ever afford to live peacefully without hurting anyone, invading anyone, without stealing, cheating, murdering, and very frequently dying in the process of trying to get ahead in life. And the process of trying to get ahead in life is what every living being does. This is the most basic, most fundamental meaning of life, to get ahead in life. This is why our pagan Slavic ancestors gave up the fight against Christianity, because they fought and they fought and they fought and they fought for centuries. And then they realized that the fight can't be won, so they gave up the fight. They watched churches being put where their holy groves and their temples used to be. They allowed themselves to be baptized to keep on living, to keep on trying to get ahead. And you know, it took some time, a few generations and centuries, but they did make it in us, the modern Rodnovers. We are now fighting back. We are finding every bit of our pagan heritage preserved for us by our ancestors, and we are getting it back. We're getting back what was taken from our ancestors with the sole purpose of giving it to our descendants, so they can also get ahead in life. And then there is you giving away resources that could sustain you and your descendants because you believed in a stupid story of, how do they call it? Historical injustice. It's not injustice, it's life, sunshine. You lose some, you win some, and you consider yourself blessed if at the end of it you are still standing and your children are standing next to you. This is the Slavic way. And then you have the historical facts. The historical fact that, with exception of Russians, Slavs did not colonize America. There were some Polish and Slovak craftsmen that arrived in Jamestown with the second supply mission in 1608. And as you know, by 1610, they were all dead. The main waves of Slavic migration to America took place at the end of the 19th century, and pretty much all Slavs stayed in cities and industrial areas. And you guessed it, they were trying to get ahead in life. As to Russians, yes, they did colonize Alaska, starting in 1741, with the second Kamchatka expedition led by a Dane, Vitus Bering, and a Russian, Alexei Chirkov. And you know what Russians did to the indigenous people of Alaska? They did to them the same they did to the indigenous people of Russia. They made them serfs. It is not fair, sure, but was it fair to the people of Russia, Ukraine or Poland to be serfs? No, it wasn't, but who cares? Life is not fair. And yet, somehow, you do not want to pay reparation to the descendants of Russian, Ukrainian and Polish serfs who had everything taken away from them, just so the Russian Tsar can pay for a Dane and a bunch of Russians to go and explore Alaska. Should the Russian Tsar pay them reparation? Well, maybe the Tsar should, but he is dead, and so is his whole family. The Bolsheviks killed them, following the order given by Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, also known as Lenin. And then the Bolsheviks took all the Tsar wealth, which was estimated in modern terms at around $55 billion. And this wealth included the wealth taken away from generations of indigenous people of Russia, Ukraine, Poland, and Alaska. And you know what Bolsheviks did with this wealth? Did they pay reparations? Did they distribute it among the most needing? Of course they didn't. They used it to pay off their debts and to support international communist activities. They sold a lot of it abroad, often at undervalued prices, because they needed money so badly. A lot of it was lost to theft, smuggling, or incomplete inventories. And then Nazis stole some of it. That, of course, after Nazis slaughtered some more indigenous people of Poland, Ukraine, and Russia. And they slaughtered these indigenous people because they stood in the Nazi way to the treasure. But according to the story you tell yourself, it's all okay because the indigenous people of Poland, Ukraine, and Russia are white. And in your woke bubbles of delusion, you do not get points for caring about white people, right? And then, after clearly dividing indigenous people into more or less worthy, basing exclusively on the skin color of the indigenous people, you stupid morons claim that you are not racist. So, those are the stories you tell yourself. That you are virtuous because you give away the future of your family. That you are a good person because you, like any good old racist, consider people less worthy just because of their skin color. That you are brave because you reject the most basic, most fundamental meaning of life, which, to make yourself feel better, you call historical injustice. And then you go on and call yourself a follower of Slavic native faith. I mean, how moronic is that? And now, the stories you tell yourself matter, especially if you want to follow Slavic native faith, because the whole Slavic native faith is based on stories that were passed through generations from the last openly pagan Slavs to us, either by blood or spiritually, the descendants of the last openly pagan Slavs. Some of the stories were written down by medieval chronicles, for example, and they were typically terribly distorted. But some of the stories were not written down until 19th or even 20th century. They were just told by parents, neighbors, older siblings, or by wandering beggars, called in the Slavic tradition dziady. These stories were also enacted, not on a scene in a theater, but in life, in the way of living. And if you read the first translation published on Vitya's Substack, you will learn that being able to provide for yourself, not being a burden to your family, was in fact a duty of a family member. It was a duty understood and fulfilled by all family members, including the parents and their children. This is why sons who, for reason of, say, disability, could not contribute to providing for their family, they were sent off to become dziady, the wandering beggars. And no one disputed it. No one thought it was unfair. On the other hand, in, say, Byliny, which are Russian epic poems, and Byliny, they originate from the times of Kievan Rus, but they were only written down in, I think, the 17th or 18th century. So in Byliny, Wołch Wsiesławiewicz, a relative of Kniaz Vladimir the Great, when this Wołch Wsiesławiewicz met Mikuła Sielanowicz, he was traveling to the towns that he owned. And he was traveling to these towns to collect from these towns yearly tribute. Such a mean capitalist he was, this Wołch Wsiesławiewicz, wasn't he? He oppressed people. Would you believe that? Another hero of Byliny was Ilya Muromiec, and one day he asked 12 other bogatyri, which is how the heroes are called in Byliny. So Ilya Muromiec asked these 12 heroes of Russia to help him to save Kiev from invasion of Tsar Kalin and his golden horde of Mongols. And you know what the 12 heroes did? They refused. And you know why they refused? Samson, the godfather of Ilya, said that they refused because Kniaz Vladimir, the ruler of Kiev, and that's citation, he has many princes and nobles, and he gives them food and drink, and he rewards them. Nothing have we from Prince Vladimir. End of quote. If you're from the West and have the Western Christianized and individualized point of view, you might think that the 12 bogatyri, they wanted to get paid, but you would be wrong, because as we know from other sources, for example from excerpts of Ibrahim ibn Yaqub's memoirs and commentaries that are included in al-Bakri's Book of Highways and of Kingdoms, we know that Mieszko I, the last initially pagan, then baptized ruler of Poland, that he treated the member of his drużyna, so his retinue, he treated them like a father would treat his sons. So Mieszko I provided the members of his drużyna with clothing, food, drinks, horses, and also paid the wedding gifts for their children. And in exchange, the members of drużyna contributed to providing safety for their family and the family of Mieszko I. So basically, drużyna operated like a family with Mieszko I as the father figure, the head of the family. In Byliny, it is also clear that Vladimir the Great treated his retinue, his princes and nobles, as his sons. He provided for them and rewarded them. But he didn't do that for the 12 heroes whom Ilya Muromiec asked for help, so the 12 heroes had no reason to risk his life for Kiev and for the cause of Vladimir the Great. And I am going to stop here because, as usually, I am already talking too much. We will pick up where we left in the next episode, which will be out on the 1st of December. And then we will definitely get to the Slavic gods and how you should relate to them as a Slavic pagan. Your homework for this month will be to identify any stories in your life that are not related to making your family healthier and stronger. Anything you tell yourself about saving the world or achieving social justice or correcting historical injustice or any other shit, just reject it fully and entirely. It is all BS and has nothing to do with the Slavic pagan way of life. Focus on your family. Focus on the roots and the future branches. Are you strong enough to support future generation? If not, build yourself up so you have resources. Spiritual resources like the strength of character, mental resources like sound judgment, physical resources like health and resilience, and material resources as well, so you can support your family in the times of need. Disregard any distraction, ignore other causes, other people, all the allegedly just callings, and also disregard your own so-called well-being. If remaining well means abandoning your family, reject remaining well and instead give your family every last bit of strength you have. And you know what will happen when you do that? You will find more strength. It will be the strength of your blood, the strength of your ancestors. It will be the strength of your Slavic soul waking up and fighting for what's really important. And for now, thank you for listening, and until next time, Sława.